I've created KSP's hardest difficulty, and I'm wondering if A-level physics can beat it. You're thinking probably yes. This is a bit like the time the American government gave a couple college students the resources to build a nuclear weapon and said, have at it. This has quite a few less stakes. The answer to that question was actually yes if you look it up. Classic American government that one. You're probably thinking, of course it's possible. People with a lot less knowledge have done a lot more with KSP, because it's a game. It gives you some helpfully placed supports that remove some of the fundamental challenges of achieving space travel, namely the delta V calculator, orbital maneuver calculators, transfer window planners, and complete orbital information. But what if you just removed all those supports and just gave it a crack, to be honest? Well, this series is just that. Can someone with just an A-level in maths and physics figure out how to get to the Moon and maybe beyond in KSP's new hardest difficulty? No supports and full Kerbal confidence. Firstly, the rule. This bit is a little bit finicky, so feel free to skip to the part which it says on the screen right now to avoid it and get just to the start of the challenge. Okay, so the rules. I cannot research anything other than fundamental values, like gravitational constants, mass of Kerbal and gravity and stuff like that. This means I'm forced to use the equations I learned in A-level physics, and then use them to derive my own equations. The only caveat to this is if I get impossibly stuck, and I can no longer progress. And I shall refer to this sort of research as espionage, going with that Cold War space race theme. This does however mean that there will be points where I'm doing genuinely stupid things and am completely oblivious to the fact, and I will say it with complete confidence, but I'm hoping that makes this very funny. Rule number 2, I can never revert to launch or VAB. Once I start, I start. This is to force me to actually think about my missions and plan instead of just doing iterative testing until I eventually somehow make it. Rule number 3, I can use derivative and integral calculators to save time. I am not that good at maths. Some of the integrals and derivatives I will need to complete are very complicated, but everything else must be figured out by me, and I'm going to walk you through this along the way. The final and most important rule, Rule 4. I cannot upgrade the tracking station, and I'll show you why now. First, I need to install some mods. I installed some mods to make it look a bit nicer and to increase the difficulty just a bit. Not RSS and RO, I'm not that crazy yet, but Kerbalism to make me actually think about being nice to my Kerbals. Then I started a new career mode save and I immediately opened the cheats menu. I'm not interested in doing a complete career playthrough, because that would make parts of this challenge just incredibly grindy and tedious. So I fully leveled my launchpad, VAB, space plane hangar and runway, so I can now launch rockets of any size. Then I got a little bit carried away and fully leveled mission control and training facility, because, well, why not? Then I unlocked a little bit of the tech tree. That gives me the necessary technology to start with orbital rockets. But most importantly, I did not touch the tracking station. So the only information I get is my apogee and perigee information through this little box in the corner. That's it. I will need to figure out everything else myself. So, here we go. In my 8 years of playing KSP, I usually just stick these bits together, do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, over-engineer it quite a lot, call it a day. And that sort of, leads to 15 reverts to VAB per mission.
Let me take you on a little trip, my super.
However, that's not an option this time, so I actually need to try and use my brain. This means that I'll actually need to think about how to build my rockets in order to make sure they can achieve manoeuvres. To do this, I'll need to think about delta V. Delta V is required for changes in orbit, such as my ascent to orbit, orbital changes, and then my transfer to and from the Moon. But what actually is delta V? Well, delta represents a change in, and the V represents velocity. Assuming ideal conditions, as we tend to do in physics, I'll define delta V as the change in velocity that a spacecraft can achieve in the ideal conditions it is calculated in. Now KSP usually calculates this for you, and you can compare this with known delta V maps to determine how to build your rocket depending on mission parameters. But I've turned that off, so I'm going to have to figure out how to do this myself. Okay, maths time. To simplify it, let's look at a solid rocket motor first. The solid rocket propellant reacts, expelling exhaust gases downwards. According to Newton's third law, every action must have an equal and opposite reaction. The gases are propelled with a force downwards, so an equal and opposite force propels the spacecraft upwards. We'll call this thrust. Therefore, we have an object of mass m being propelled upwards with a force F, thrust. Using Newton's second law, F equals ma, we can determine the acceleration of the rocket upwards due to this force. So in our example case using the Flea solid rocket motor, the thrust force is 162.909 kilonewtons. The total mass of our craft is 1,120 kilograms. Therefore the acceleration is 135.6 meters per second squared. Perfect. It tells us that the SRB has 140 fuel units. It burns this fuel at a rate of 15.821 fuel units per second. So the burn time is 8.848998 seconds. Therefore our delta V is equal to our acceleration times time because it is accelerating at this rate over this amount of time. So the final velocity is 1,200 meters per second. Brilliant. That wasn't too hard, was it? Apart from it's completely wrong. I have ignored a lot here.
If you ignore it, it will go away.
Some may say even too much. And so my final value is likely very far away from the true value.
That's quite big.
So let's try and refine it. The first big thing I need to add to my calculation is gravity. To try and keep it simple, I'm going to assume that the gravitational acceleration remains constant throughout the flight at any altitude. Gravitational acceleration on Kerbal is 9.81 meters per second, so my resultant force is equal to the thrust minus the gravitational acceleration times mass. However, as the SRB burns fuel, there's less fuel remaining, so the mass of the SRB decreases. This means that the value of mg decreases and the resultant upwards force increases. I'll need to factor this into my equation. The density of the solid rocket fuel is 7.5 kilograms per unit. So the initial mass of the SRB is 1,500 kilograms. The total mass loss is 7.5 times 15.821 per unit time, T. Therefore, the mass of the SRB is 1,500 minus 118.6575 T, where T has to be less than or equal to 8.848998 seconds. So, substituting this into the new force equation. My resultant force is equal to the force of thrust minus the initial mass minus the rate of fuel burn times fuel density times time, all times by gravity. Then if we substitute that into the overall F equals ma equation and rearrange that for acceleration, we get this equation, which I'm not even going to read out because it's just bonkers. Now, this is the standard equation. This means I can substitute any numbers into it. But if we substitute the values in for our example rocket, then we get this. 147,507.3 plus 1,164.03 T over 1,570 minus 118.6575 T. I know that the integral of acceleration with respect to time is velocity, because the area under an acceleration time graph is velocity. So if we integrate our acceleration equation between the limits of the thrust time, which is time equals 0 and time equals 8.848998 seconds, then we'll find our delta velocity. Using this helpfully found integral calculator, because I'm not that good at maths, our delta V turns out to be 1,430 meters per second. Perfect. This value actually looks like something delta V could be, feasibly with the size of our SRB. And you're probably thinking, wow, you made that look so easy and you obviously didn't struggle at all. Here is a short montage of me really struggling.
Why
Why
is this number so
squared?
long? I don't feel like I
Can't
have
just
a T
substitute
squared.
in time, it doesn't work.
Wow!
Minus
Would it help
minus
if I
plus.
actually got my maths correct?
What if I use
forgotten
kinetic
about
energy? That
momentum.
might help.
I've forgotten what this letter means.
Anyway, now that that's over, let me launch my test vehicle, and the final velocity should obviously be 1,430 meters per second. Ah. Oh, okay. Just so close, you know. Okay, so now I get to look at the limitation of my equation. Well, the first one obviously is I haven't used the efficiency of the engine in my calculation. I've only used the value of thrust at sea level. So basically what I'm saying is happening is this. That's obviously not what's happening. As it gets higher in the atmosphere, its efficiency actually slightly increases and the thrust increases, but I haven't accounted for that. So my delta V calculation is going to be a little bit low. And to fix that, I have to use something called specific impulse, but I don't actually know what it is, and I can't research it because that would break the rules of the challenge. So I'm just going to have to go with what I've got, but what I've got is pretty close. But it's not achieving the value which I've set out in my delta V by quite a significant amount. So there must be something really big and complicated causing a problem which I just haven't thought of yet. In A-level physics, we always just pretended that air resistance didn't exist. But now we need to pretend it exists. Compared to KSP's vacuum, which is modelled as a perfect vacuum which has no air resistance, Kerbin's atmosphere has an actual atmosphere with real air resistance. Now in A-level physics, we never touched on air resistance other than giving it a constant drag coefficient. However, drag due to air resistance is dependent on velocity. As the craft moves more quickly, it has to push through more air particles per unit time. As the craft does work to push through the air does work against the craft. Therefore, the more air it has to push through per unit time, the greater the opposing force of drag. This makes it very, very, very difficult to model. So I'll give it a crack. Firstly, I will need to determine the density of the air in the atmosphere. To do this, I can find the density at sea level using the in-game barometer and thermometer. I would then be able to model the exponential decay of atmospheric density using the Boltzmann constant and kinetic theory. Atmospheric density decays exponentially. I know that air density is equal to pressure over the specific gas constant for air times the temperature in Kelvin. So knowing that the density at sea level is what I've calculated, and at 70 kilometers is 0, I now need to model this exponentially. I would then need to find a relationship between the force of drag and atmospheric density. This is where it becomes very tricky, because I would then need to create an iterative model which has the force of thrust subtract the drag force, with that changing at different altitudes. Using my resultant force, I would then need to calculate the acceleration, hence the velocity, hence the distance it has travelled in that time, and then relate that distance back to the original altitude. The then new altitude which the spacecraft is at would determine the pressure and temperature at that altitude. That pressure and temperature then affect the air density. That air density then affects the force of drag, and that force of drag then changes the resultant force at the very start, in this sort of looping process you can see here. So, I put the numbers I calculated into a spreadsheet and tried to recreate the iterative process. But, as I did not know the actual drag force equation, I was essentially stuck after around 4 days of effort. From here, I had two options. Either break the first rule of the challenge and do a little bit of espionage, or use my prior KSP experience and my newfound ability to calculate the delta V of my rocket to create a rocket that should be capable of orbit. For the sake of Jebediah's dad law, and how long this video is becoming, I went with option 2. Give it a crack. And I shall now pass you over to Commentary Me, who will walk you through the design and launch process. So, hello and welcome to the live commentary. This is my first time doing live commentary, so it'll probably be rubbish. So, when I designed this rocket, I sort of thought I'd go, you know what, I'll go for a Mercury style rocket, keeping in that space race sort of theme, the Mercury rocket being the rocket that took Alan Shepard, the first American astronaut, into space. And if Editor Me remembers, it shall flash up on the screen right now so you can see a picture of the different stages and compare it to what I've made. It's semi-accurate. It's not as accurate as it could be. I did try, but I'm not that good at building. As you will definitely see when you watch this, you'll realise, wow, he is really bad at building stuff. Oh my god. The eagle-eyed among you might notice that I have left the Delta V on. Now, I tried very hard to turn it off. I then changed it to a different planet. It didn't want to work. So, trying to keep in the rules of calculating everything myself, I have ignored it. And I'm going to use my own calculation. And at the end, I will sort of flash the values of what I calculated for this rocket. I was aiming for around 4,000 meters of meters a second of Delta V. Because I've sort of assumed I want an 100-kilometer orbit, and I thought that would sort of, get me into that orbit quite nicely. But I couldn't turn it off, so I've tried to ignore it, and I will calculate it myself, keeping in fitting. I've covered up all the other stuff, so I can't see it, basically, is how I'm trying to work this. Anyway, moving on from that, you can now see that I'm building the upper stage. If I can pick what engine I want, it takes me ages to decide which one I want, and I still managed to choose literally the worst option. Foreshadowing, we might see why in the future why this was such a bad option for me to choose. Anyway, and you'll see here I'm going to start adding some fairings, and I'm going to make them silver. Because as you probably saw in the picture of the Mercury rocket, it was actually very silver, had that chrome plated exterior, which does mean that my rocket is going to have a lot less fuel and a higher mass, but I mean, we're going for the aesthetics here, keeping with that nice space race theme with those silver rockets. I quite like it. That's why I went for it. But yeah, it did mean that whilst I was making this rocket, I kept having to pause and sort of write down the mass and the thrust and all the other stuff and do lots of calculations, which made it take a really long time. And also, because my Delta V calculation is a little bit low for what it actually is, I think it did mean that I ended up having loads of extra Delta V by the time I got into orbit. I called it Hermes 1. I thought Hermes 1 was quite a cool name. But yeah, I think we are now going to crossfade into the launch. Here we go. So welcome to the launch pad. You'll notice that I have a launch escape system at the top of my rocket, and I need that because of the second rule of the challenge, that we cannot revert to VAB or spaceplane hangar. So if this goes wrong, it goes wrong. And I will have to sort it out on the fly, which means I would like a launch escape system to protect my Kerbals. Ready? Looks like I'm about to take off. Here we go, and we have liftoff, which is good. That means I calculated my thrust to weight ratio correctly. Go me. So you'll probably notice that I've gone really into depth in this video about Delta V and some of the maths and stuff, but I haven't touched on actually how to get into orbit and what an orbital ascent profile looks like. I'm going to touch more on that next video. I just thought, for the sake of how long this video is at this point, I know how to do an orbital ascent profile. I've played enough KSP to do that. I know how to do an efficient one. I'll talk about it next video. I thought let's just put a rocket into orbit. So you can see me starting my gravity turn now. It's a little bit late, and I do sort of realise that I don't have a lot of gimbal authority. So it's a bit of a tricky turn. It's quite a steep ascent profile, but you know what? It's right. But our first stage is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's sort of teetering over. I am at 15,000 meters. I should be at 45 degrees already. I'm also going way too quickly for how thick the atmosphere is here. I'm hoping that I don't get any flames, but we'll probably see some flames later. My apoapsis height is looking nice. It's already at 60,000. I've only just reached 45 degrees. So yeah, this is how you don't do an ascent profile. But we can't revert to launch and give it another go. That's the rules of the challenge. We gotta play it as it lies. Or you regret to that one a little bit. Anyway, our apoapsis is reaching 100. I've throttled down, and you'll notice, oh, the engines have failed. Thank you, Kerbalism. That's a great feature. I've completely messed up my staging, so the fairings go before it detaches. So the bottom booster now looks rubbish. This is going terribly. I detached the launch escape tower. We don't need it. Now, when I was building the rocket, you probably remember me saying, oh, this upper stage engine is terrible. Well, we're about to find out why. It only gets 3 ignitions before it will fail. I didn't look at this in the vehicle assembly building. I also didn't look at its thrust to weight ratio at all. And you'll sort of notice me here sort of panicking a little bit, going, what? Because I don't have a maneuver node planner. And I'm like, well, when do I need to start burning so that I actually make a complete orbit without re-entering the atmosphere? Anyway, I time warp ahead, being very confident myself to be able to do that. Obviously, I must have done some maths on a piece of paper somewhere. I did all my maths for this actually in a book, and I was thinking once I've got it here. Once I finished, I've started my burn, so I got distracted. I'll talk about that later. Yeah, so we're starting our circularization burn now. Something I'll talk about in my next video about orbit and orbital mechanics is how I will determine what spin is my orbit. So, as we can see with the Kerbal engineer readout, my time to apoapsis is decreasing. Ooh, it's steady. It's steady. It's increasing. I started my burn at the perfect time. Definitely on accident. I didn't do a good enough calculation for that with enough time. And then you can see me sort of pitching below the horizon to keep that circular orbit. Circular orbits are much easier to work with, as we'll find out next video. Oh, I'm teasing next video already. And now you can see me doing another burn there. So I've used up 2 of my burns already with this engine. Subtle foreshadowing again. I'm not very subtle, am I? Anyway, so we're now in orbit, and you can see I've got the resources tab open at the top right, and it's got oxygen and nitrogen. In the build video, I've neglected to mention that I have my life support systems in a little elongated section above the capsule. In the Mercury and Gemini capsules, that's actually where they had the life support system. So I thought, you know what, I'll replicate that. That would be quite cool. It's also where my parachutes are and my docking system, because the Gemini's sort of purpose of that program was to figure out how to do orbital docking. That's really tricky, is what I've learned trying to give that a go. But we'll touch more on that next video. But yeah, so electric charge is something which I will need to experiment with, because making it, like creating electric charge, is really tricky, because we don't have access to very good solar panels, we don't have access to fuel cells, and, well, good fuel cells. And, well, electric charge consumption is required to keep the life support system of the Kerbals alive. And I quite like my Kerbals, and I can't revert to saves, so if I mess it up, they're gone. Anyway, I know this is a really, really brief orbit, but this is just me testing that my delta V is correct. You can see I've got 570 meters a second of delta V extra from their calculation and my calculation. We both agree I put way too much delta V into this rocket. Here we go. I'm doing my final burn. Oh, and it's failed. Well, that's not good, is it? Because I'm not in an orbit which is going to enter the atmosphere, so I need to hope that this burn... Oh, it will. It's okay. That final burn has got me back into the atmosphere, but on my very first mission, I have now left a bit of space debris. It's not looking good for me, is it? I'm not doing a very good job. But yeah, I deorbit burn with the smaller engines beneath the heat shield. I really, really like this upper capsule which I've made. I'm going to use it a few more times to sort of demonstrate orbital mechanics in the next video. I will change that engine on the upper stage because it's just, I don't like it. Only 3 ignitions is lethal. But yeah, after how long has our flight been? Our flight has been 26 minutes. Not even that, because we fast forwarded most of it in orbit. They're a very small space hop. Yeah, I know we got into orbit, but practically it's basically just a suborbital hop with how far we're actually going to go. Anyway, I do a smart thing and I time warp into the atmosphere, which is of course a terrible idea. Physics time warp, that could have just eaten my Kerbals alive. Do another small burn to just change my trajectory. I realised I was going to be landing on land, which would not have been a good thing for my parachutes. And I have separated that small sort of orbital change stage, and I'm preparing myself to re-enter the atmosphere. So, all in all, very good mission. It's shown that my delta V calculation is correct, and that I am accurately calculating how much delta V, and now I know how much delta V I need to get into orbit. It's around 4,000 meters a second. So, using the scientific method sort of style instead of actually working it out, I have found out how much delta V I need to get into orbit, which is really good. And it shows up I've spent the first 15 minutes of this video not just making stuff up, fingers crossed. And lovely re-entry graphics here, thanks to the Firefly mod. And we're just re-entering the atmosphere now, not really much left to talk about. Oh yes, I am circling. I have plasma blackout turned on, so I've lost communication to my capsule because of the plasma heating, which is interrupting radio signals. So fancy physics going on there, I don't really understand, but that's a thing that happens. And at a very high altitude, our drogue chutes have opened. And hopefully we are going to have a very nice, gentle splashdown into the ocean. So yeah, that is pretty much it for the first video. In summary, we figured out what delta V was, we figured out we don't like air resistance, and we've got our Kerbals into orbit and out of orbit, and they didn't die. So obviously we are doing something correct. Look at us go. And we did all that without any support, which is even better. I hope you enjoyed this first video. It will make a series because we are going to the Mun. In our next video, we get to figure out orbital maneuvers, and we even do a cheeky flyby of the Mun, but you'll have to stay tuned to see if we manage to get back. Ooh, foreshadowing. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure to like it and maybe even subscribe, I don't know. Oh, you see me doing the roll of the capture. I was like, oh, actually, in real life, I'll flash up the picture here of how it landed. But yeah, anyway. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, and hopefully you will have a look at the next video. Goodbye.